Perfect. So everyone, welcome to Succeeding with KeHE with Alex Marx. Alex is the category director at KeHE, and Alex would love for you to just give a quick intro to yourself and KeHE before we hop on in.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. There's some familiar faces out there today, so it's nice to see some returning faces and nice to see some new faces as well. I'm Alex Marx. Like Jordan said, I'm a director on our category management team. I've been with KeHE for about 10 years. I've spent most of my time in category management roles. I led the coffee, tea, and beverage categories in Boulder, Colorado. I worked on site at New Seasons Market in Portland, Oregon for a few years. And I led our customer category management team at KeHE for a while. And then now I do have nutrition bar category, but I also lead a small team of category managers with categories from vitamins, mineral supplements, to pet food, to cookies and crackers and everything else. My claim to fame in KeHE is probably that I've worked out of all 4 time zones with KeHE, which, you know, I've only been with KeHE for 10 years, so kind of do the math. I'm like a little bit of a corporate gypsy, but I'm hopefully going to be staying put in the Chicagoland area now. And for those of you who don't know much about KeHE, I'll just give like a 5 light year view. KeHE is a natural and specialty food distributor. We have over 70,000 items in our enterprise. We have 16 DCs. So 13 of those distribution centers are in the US, and then 3 are in Canada. Of those 70,000 items, there's about 5,000 suppliers, a few thousand more brands than that. And we're a $6 billion ESOP organization with people. We're a quadruple bottom line. So I like to say we're people, profit, purpose organization.
Well, as we kind of kick off, Alex, why don't you give a quick overview of how brands should view distribution? Because I know sometimes brands will see a distributor and think, oh, great, they have thousands of doors. We'll start with them and they'll immediately sell our product into every location they work with. It doesn't quite work that way.
It doesn't quite work that way all the time. There's always the, romanticized success stories, and believe it or not, that might happen, but it's kind of like 1 in a million, so let's not bank on winning the lottery every day. I think the best way to view KeHE is truly, we're a supply chain partner of yours. Think about it like this. I mean, we have a vested interest in your success. So, it's easy to look at KeHE and maybe look at us as an unnecessary middleman. But that's certainly not the case. Capitalism would have kicked KeHE out of the picture some time ago if we had no use. But ultimately, we're partners that want to be part of your growth story, and there's lots of ways that we can do that.
So let's look at some of the brands who are just getting started, who aren't quite in distribution yet. When's the right time for a brand or company to start that conversation with KeHE and kind of move into distribution with you, or starting to work with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the days of yesteryear, which I guess I should classify 3, 4, 5 years ago, et cetera, it was probably, hey, let's right away have an anchor account. We need distribution turned on right away, and we need you 100% buttoned up. But really, that's changed, and it's changed because we're reacting to what our retailers want. Our retailers, they don't want us to be a wholesaler. Our retailers want us to be a natural and specialty food distributor that works with emerging brands to bring innovation to the table for them. So on a bell curve, we probably operate like right down there, and the tail end is our sweet spot. And we're more than happy to work with brands that are, we work with brands that are just, developing concepts still. We want to be consulting with those folks. Actually, this past year, we were tasked to find innovation in, call it like unconventional places for a distributor. So we sent our team to farmers markets all over the country. And we talked with people that were, making pasta sauce in their kitchen, and people that didn't have a co-packer and didn't seem buttoned up yet. And that's okay. So I think at the very least, it's start the conversation as early as we can. Building on that a little more, we did just launch a new and emerging brands program called KeHE Elevate. So Elevate is it's for these new and emerging brands. So we launched it in January. Right now we have about 55, 60 brands. And we want to have around 150 by the end of the year, and hopefully 200 by this time next year. So that program is specifically built to help new and emerging brands come to market. And it's a high visibility, high touch program, meaning it's built to demystify distributorship and the grocery world, because we all know distributorship is not simply moving a box from A to B, and grocery is not just putting an item on shelf, calling it a day, and it getting scanned through the register. It's very complex, and again, we're trying to build programs in place to demystify that whole experience.
So I love the Elevate program. Talk a little bit more about some of the tangible benefits that brands can see by going through it. What's different than just the normal process?
Yeah, when we were developing the program, we had a test group of really sharp entrepreneurs who we trusted. Jordan was part of that test group. We weren't arrogant in that we thought like we know everything about how to launch a brand. We're pretty good at distributorship and supply chain, but we brought in a host of entrepreneurs that have done this time and time again to learn from them. So a couple of the areas we identified as opportunities were, cost. We know it's difficult financially for a brand to launch in the marketplace. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And the other piece is that whole demystifying the complexities piece that I was talking about. It's really confusing. Like I said, I've worked with KeHE for 10 years, and there's random parts of the week where I'm like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be learning this much about my organization 10 years in. Oh, I can only imagine how confusing this is for new suppliers. So what we did was we tried to combat those two areas. So for cost, we give a handful of cost breaks to just increase brand awareness at a lower cost. So we have these things like, launching a brand at a show it's great, but shows aren't cheap. So we cut those prices in half. We have programs that bring your inventory into DCs to just kind of start that process. And we've eliminated that cost or that fee entirely. Now, you still have to promote, and there's still tons of costs associated with doing business, but there's a bunch of different cost breaks. I won't go through every single one, but it's a 2-year program, and you can have those cost breaks for 2 years. The other piece in demystifying KeHE is, that one's really tricky. Like I said, even I learn new things at KeHE all the time, and I've been here for a decade. almost a third of my life, I should mention. And what we did was we decided to have weekly meetings. So category manager with suppliers. So I have 3 Elevate suppliers today. I meet with all of them on a weekly basis. It's since we're in COVID, we're video conferencing. It's not a phone call, it's not live. We're doing Zoom. And we're just talking about the complexities and how to navigate this, who to talk to, how to create a target list. Once you identify your strategy, your launch strategy, how do you approach those people? What do you offer them? And then we set expectations. Hey, this is the cost of doing business. This retailer has slotting fees, or they dictate strong promotional activity. So it's all of that communication.
I think that's great. I think for people who have worked with distributors, sometimes it can be a little bit of a black box. You maybe have a relationship manager or account manager that you work with, but then you don't have that one-on-one interaction, especially not weekly. Sometimes it's even like quarterly for some brands. So I think that's a really awesome benefit, so that as problems come up, you can address them right away. And as opportunities come up or you have questions, you can leverage that knowledge from your KeHE rep to do that. And then the discounts are also huge because it can be expensive, and that's just with building a brand. There's lots of costs that are involved, and so kind of demystifying that, I think, is really good. Brandon asks, how do you actually apply to the Elevate program?
Yeah, it's one of 2 ways essentially. I mean, one, I will say that we're out there foraging and we're looking for these brands. So for me personally, one of the brands I sought out, and then 2 of the brands were brought to me. The brands that were brought to me, it was through a mutual contact. And they were both brokers. And then they presented their items, and as they were presenting, it was just, I knew, like, hey, I think these guys are special. They have the opportunity to have some legs in this industry, and I asked them. Now, if you wanted to ignite the conversation, I would say just reach out to your category manager. You can find out who that category manager is on our website, or you can go through RangeMe and submit, and you can simply just tell them, hey, I learned about this awesome program. This is what I bring to the category. I plan to bring incremental sales because of X, Y, and Z, and just start to have that conversation.
Okay, yeah. How important is it to kind of reach out through RangeMe or set that up as an account?
Yeah, I mean, look, RangeMe is a great partner. A year or 2 ago, I would have said, yeah, it's an option. But right now, I mean, think about it. We're not meeting with brands live. So these creative communications, whether it be RangeMe or a virtual show or whatever it may be, I mean, yeah, get scrappy. You got to get scrappy right now. We know that.
Yeah, that's good. And then Polly asked, how is KeHE Elevate different from like the New at KeHE program?
Yeah, so New at KeHE, well, I'll back up. We always talk about chicken or the egg. How do we bring in inventory first, or do we have an anchor account first? And New at KeHE is the solve for the inventory piece. So New at KeHE, for a small fee, you can bring in inventory to a number of different DCs. And that I'll just expand on the program a little more. Once you submit into that program, we call them the product innovation gurus. We have this team of people that we look at a few different criteria of these items. So it's ingredients, innovation, taste, saleability, and then we also look at this 5th component, purpose-driven. Like I said, we're a quadruple bottom line. And by the way, I think I forgot to say planet. I think I got that like a minute after I said quadruple. We're super focused on that giving back aspect. So purpose driven is a component of that. And if we do think that your item scores high in those areas, we'll actually have you as what we call a top pick. We select a few top brands every month that participate in New at KeHE, and you get a little bit extra love. So that just means like front cover of the communication vehicle that goes out to all of the reps in those DCs where you put inventory in. And so that's almost a New at KeHE from A to Z. Whereas Elevate is, like I said, it's that high visibility, high touch, cost break program. It's much more elaborate.
Gotcha. That's helpful. And then talk about the role that KeHE plays in relationship to working with a retailer. Because once you're kind of in distribution, like you said, you typically will bring in an anchor account or at least some retailers in that will pull from KeHE. But as a brand, it's important to have both a relationship with the retailer because they're ultimately going to be selling your product. But logistically, you're selling your product to KeHE, and then KeHE is selling it to the retailer. So you have to both work simultaneously with the retailer and KeHE for things like promotions, any fees, placement within the store, category reviews. So talk a little bit about that interaction.
Yeah, it's probably tough to have like a complete blanket statement because every retailer, like some buyers, they want to have great relationships with all their suppliers, and some are like, hey, I'll hear from you in 6 months. Cool. But generally, and I'll say, even at KeHE, there is a little bit of variance in how our folks interact with retailers. And I'll go through a little bit of that. So at independents, our sales force, they're selling. And when I say selling, they are presenting brands all the time. And they're trying to show innovation to these natural food retailers, grocery independent retailers. So in that world, getting close with those guys. So that means finding out who they are, getting on maybe their regional sales calls or meeting them at shows, just having that communication. And by the way, I know that's not easy because we have 70,000 items in our enterprise. So that's a lot of emails to those people. But then to our grocery chain folks, we try to be integrated into their category reviews as much as possible. And at some, it's more than others. So we've got really, really great partnerships with some of our key retailers. So maybe I won't name names, but for some of them, present to them not exactly like you would to a buyer per se, because we're your partner in this pitch, but these people are presenting to buyers almost every single category review. And hey, the retailers own the sets 100%. But a lot of them are trusted people. I mean, there's a lot of account managers. Maybe for this one, I will name names. At Central Market, our guy Kevin Lancaster, he's been there for I think 25 or 30 years. They go to birthday parties of the buyers' kids. They're so close. So it's all one family. And then on the natural chain side. By the way, I got distracted. I love that there's kids in the background and family. Oh no, Jackie, that's great. It's such a reality. It's so cool. Okay. No, don't apologize. That's my ADD, not anything with you. That's great. And then on our natural chain side, it's probably pretty similar the way we look at grocery chain. We've got folks dialed in there. At Sprouts, we're partners with them. We're an extension of their supply chain. we've got upwards of 20 people that work on that account. So again, those buyers own the sets, and like those, they're studs. Like those buyers know those categories really, really well. But we try to get in there and share as much information as possible. So, and so, I know this is a little long-winded, but when I think of who the best leaders are, who the best partners, co-workers, brands, etc., they almost all have one common denominator, and that's they're great communicators. Like all of them, all of the best ones. So being a good communicator to both parties is more critical, I think, than probably ever.
Yeah, I think what you're kind of mentioning as well is highlighting that communication and also relationship building. And it's so important that these are not necessarily transactional relationships. They're really kind of built over time and trust. And like you said, there's 70,000 products in the enterprise. And so I've experienced this too, building that camaraderie and relationship with the buyer, not just around your product, but also just personally pays a long way. But then having that strong selling story where you're able to, partner with them to grow your product through the system. It's a lot of work, and there's a lot of people and brands vying for the attention of buyers and category managers across the way. So that it definitely makes a big impact. So transitioning, once, let's imagine you're a brand, you're currently selling into KeHE, you're in a couple of accounts. What's the process then for continuing to grow to more retailers in terms of, what's the best way to approach it, kind of expanding within the DC, kind of spawning out and going to multiple distribution centers? How do you see the best brands grow?
Yeah, well, I think you hit it. I mean, and it's not just one of those things. So it's not just DCs. It's not just, having a strong sales force. It's like a combination of all of these things. I mean, you just, at bare bones, you have to have a strategy. I mean, you'd be shocked how many people we talk to, they're just like, I don't know, I'm just trying to get into doors. It's like, well, wait, okay. Do you have a regional strategy? Do you have a channel strategy? Do you perform better in the Southeast than you do in the Pacific Northwest? Let's talk about why, and then let's, maybe try to balance that. So having a strategy, and then it's communicating with KeHE, communicating with your category managers, the account managers, etc. I mean, viewing, and this goes back, it's like full circle to the beginning of the conversation, view KeHE as a partner in this. So I'll give you an example. So we just had to have our first virtual show, our first large-scale virtual show, completely unexpected, this past spring or early summer, I should say. And we learned a lot of insights from that. We learned maybe which categories performed better, what types of suppliers performed better, and all of our category managers are gleaning and learning from these experiences. So reach out to them and ask them, and trust them. Ultimately, it's easy for us to say, well, you should do this as a supplier, and you should do this, because it's not our checkbook on the line, and we get that. But we're totally glad to share as many insights as we can. So having a strategy, communicating that strategy, and then as far as the best brands, there's not an easy button. The way that RX Bar, shout out to Jasmine, who was on this, I know, the way that RX Bar and Boulder Canyon launched are probably two totally different ways. So there's not an easy button. There's not a path that takes you directly from A to Z that's perfect. There's going to be headaches, curveballs, all sorts of wild things that you just have to learn how to adapt with. And working with a good broker, working with a good distributor, having a good team, because nobody knows it all, is critical.
walk through some of the layers of people within KeHE itself that are good to know, because there's category managers, there's salespeople for each individual accounts, there's kind of like regional directors, like who are kind of the core, not naming names, but like what are the kind of core roles that you need to, have an interaction with or build a relationship with throughout that process? Because not always just like one person.
Yeah, that's so true. First is your category manager, like you said. When I describe the category manager role to people, I often say we're like air traffic controllers. We're like, okay, I don't have all the answers for sure, and I've been here 10 years. I don't at KeHE, but I know someone that does. So your category manager is going to be critical, and then they'll be able to guide you in the right directions. Knowing the account managers at all the accounts you're either in or want to be in is really important. Like I said, they have incredible relationships with the buyers. They understand the intricacies of all the accounts, the way that New Seasons Market approaches promotions versus Fresh Time approaches promotions. They're very different. And if you don't ask that account manager or your broker, or your category manager, I mean, you might just never know. So account manager, category manager, account manager are probably your two most.
Gotcha. And then walk through some of the levers that brands have in working with KeHE to help move product into retailers. Things like how promotions work and which kind of promotions typically work best.
Yeah, there's certain nuances with different categories, but I'll share my personal opinion. I think when it comes to driving velocity or distribution, by the way, but probably primarily distribution and then velocity as a second, shows are so critical. And what that means today is virtual shows. So it's giving those a try. That's where I say, if you have bare bones X amount of thousands of dollars to spend, go to a show, work show only deals, and we'll build from there. But once you're a little bit more sophisticated and you're a little bit more developed, I should actually probably say, then yeah, we have lots of promo drivers in our organization. So, like I said, 70,000 brands, 70,000 items, thousands of brands. So how do you stand out amongst the crowd? It's probably a lot of participating in some of these promotional vehicles. We have K-Stack programs, super special programs where KeHE actually kicks in funds, and then these publications are sent out directly to retailers. They're sent out to our sales force, and sometimes they're scorecarded against the success of these. So we make sure that when you are promoting and you do have these special ad vehicles, that there is a high ROI on them. So every year we have these promotional roadmap meetings where you get an opportunity to connect with your category manager, talk about these programs. We generally share, maybe not exact ROI numbers to the percentage, but we do often tier them. Like I can tell you right now, for the nutrition bar category, K-Stacks were the highest ROI promotional driver that we had last year. A very close second were super specials. And mind you, these are programs that are often geared towards independents, because we know some of the largest suppliers have like incredible relationships with some of the largest chains, and people don't take their eye off the ball when it comes to Target and Sprouts. Like, people are dialed in, but we have a lot of these programs built so our independents, they're not losing, because it's easy to miss a lot of those doors. So a lot of those ad vehicles are geared towards independence.
Can you just define a little bit like what those promotions were that you're mentioning in terms of K-Stacks and like the super specials, just for people that might not know?
Sure. So a case stack, you have to have a national deal in place to run a case stack. So you have a national deal, but then you can build on top of that with incremental cases, and you can set the parameters of that. So what I mean is, you can say, hey, if I sell 1 to 5 cases at retailer X, they're going to get 15% off. And then if they buy 6 to 9 cases, they get whatever, 25%, and you can build on that. And for the super special, that is, it's an ad in our Marketing Monthly publication that goes out to thousands and thousands of retailers across the country. And it's just like, our super specials are basically a way to just stand out. There's a lot of pages in this thing, and it's also digital too, so it's not always rolling your thumbs. There's a lot of pages, but our best independents and our best territory sales managers know that you can go straight to super specials if you want the hottest deals. So if you promote at X amount, KeHE will actually kick in 5%. If you promote at the next tier, KeHE kicks in 10%, and then it goes all the way up to 35%. If a supplier has a 35% deal, KeHE will actually kick in 15% on that deal to make it a 50% off deal.
Gotcha. So that would be a great way just to get your product into new retailers because it lowers the risk for them.
Distribution and velocity driver for sure. Absolutely.
Excellent. So then slightly different question. So Polly asks, we are in talks with one of the category managers at KeHE. However, we don't currently supply the US or have a storage facility in the US. Do you work with any smaller brands from the UK? And if so, do you recommend any US storage facilities to use, or how that process might work?
Yeah, so we work with, by the way, lots of importers. We work with suppliers that have those storage facilities all over, but we don't particularly recommend one over the other. We've got great partners across the spectrum, kind of similar to how we approach brokers. You know, there's so many great brokers out there, and when suppliers ask like, "Hey, what's the best broker for me?" Like, well, I don't know. Only you know that. I might recommend you talk to these 6 or 7, but ultimately, a broker relationship, an importer, or anyone else kind of in that realm, you've got to try them out for yourself because it's not a one size fits all.
Gotcha. Thanks. And then Keith asks, how have you or how have others been successful in taking the focus at some of these trade shows off of what he calls the depth of the deal, the depth, and more on the importance of the assortment and placement for everyday non-promoted sales success?
Yeah, I think, you know, that, look, if you have a great brand, if your product tastes incredible, it's priced right, it's going to bring incrementality to the market, yeah, you might not need to have free cases and free placements. That's maybe not. But I don't know. We don't really have anything in particular that combats promos against maybe an everyday price. But I will say when we bring brands to the show, the show has turned into an application process. We used to have to, what I'll just call, sell the show. It's no longer the case. We have wait lists that go on for pages and pages and pages. So if we bring your brand to the show and we allow you into the show, there's likely a good chance we're communicating that to retailers. So we have these vehicles, we have sneak peeks before every show. So at our last show, I have the nutrition bar category. So I got in front of a camera and did a 2-minute video and talked about some of the suppliers that I was hosting that I was most excited about, and that gets sent out to all the retailers. We also have a section in our sneak peek that is on just trends in general. So let's just pick an easy one, we'll say keto. We might create a PowerPoint slide that talks about the data behind keto, why it's popular, how to merchandise it, and then we always, always, always bring these trends back to brands. So then we point out a number of brands that might be showcasing at the show that fit those trends. So there's lots of things we do to communicate all brands to the retailers attending.
Awesome. And then just as a message to everyone else who's listening in, if you have any questions for Alex, we have about 20 minutes left. Feel free to reach or add those to the chat and I'll ask those. So question from Renee. She says, we're already in KeHE as a newer brand brought on via Sprouts. We're now trying to grow our partnership with KeHE into other accounts, but are struggling to get another SKU in stock. It's the third of a line, and even though it's already in the system, it's not in the DC yet because Sprouts doesn't carry it. So how's the best way of going about doing that? Is it something that you need to do, by building a relationship with the account manager or rep to get that third item in?
Yeah, the closest thing to an easy button that you have with that item is to participate in that New at KeHE program, which will bring in inventory, which will then relieve pressure from maybe like a small mom and pop to bringing your product in. So what I mean by that is we often command anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40 points of distribution before we actually bring an item in. And that's just because, there's only so much space in our warehouse. So the way that the thing that keeps you in the warehouse slotted is turns. And if you're only in a couple points of distribution, it's not going to be enough to maintain order minimums and just velocities for that DC. Now, if you don't do New at KeHE, how could you get in? Yeah, it's small ball. There's like not an easy way. It's a ground game. So you're talking to account managers, you're connecting with the territory sales managers, reaching out to retailers, going to shows, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I can share kind of an experience too. When I was building up to another DC, is like working with some of the retailers who pulled from there and kind of getting commitments from them back to the category manager, and then kind of playing this back and forth until you kind of assemble this cast of companies that will all come together to buy, and you kind of have to wrangle everyone together for that. All right, great. And then talk to me about some of the brands that have not been successful with KeHE and some of the reasons that can happen.
What a somber subject, Jordan.
Oh, yeah, gotta get real.
Hey, let's get real. So, brands that don't communicate. So, no one likes a curveball. There's brands where, oh boy, don't get me going. There's brands that just, they might not communicate a long-term out of stock, and we don't know. So then we discontinue the product, and then the product gets taken off the retailer's shelf, and we don't communicate it's a long-term out of stock, and it just creates turmoil because there's just confusion. And then if there's too much confusion and product doesn't show up, the tag gets pulled, like period, at most retailers. So it's communication, but it's also not knowing your numbers. So I forget what the exact phrase is. Like, you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. Well, one thing that KeHE is really good with is data transparency. We've got a supplier portal, a vendor portal that is it's phenomenal, and we give really detailed data points. So we tell you what our fill rate is to our suppliers. We raise our hand if maybe we're not doing something. We tell you what points of distribution you're at, what fill rates are or SRPs are at these different retailers. So the people that I see not succeed are the people that don't take the time to look at these data points. And then elaborating on maybe some of the stuff that's not as fun, Look, it's not free to do business with a distributor. There are deductions and chargebacks from ad vehicles for setting up new items, et cetera, et cetera. So if you lose focus of these costs, if you take your eye off the ball, it can start to accumulate. And if you're not aware of the cost of doing business with certain retailers or distributors, it's probably not going to end well. The strongest suppliers communicate. They know their business. They know their category managers. And again, I hate to name names and brands and such, but yeah, I mean, I'll just say it because Jasmine's on the call. I had a question about multi-packs, and I immediately called Jasmine's cell phone, and I'm like, hey, what do you think's going on with multi-packs? And she gives me this super elaborate, super buttoned up answer. And building trust and communication like that with some of your top suppliers is critical. So the opposite, not knowing your category manager, not communicating, it can be a death sentence.
Yeah, I think that's really key. One of the things that, frankly, I've talked to other brands that have as well, is being aware of some of the fees and deductions, but not necessarily understanding the implication of like the scale. And so there can be certain fees in terms of like opening up new accounts. But then when you start growing really fast, then those can all start compounding. And then, even I'll share, we had an issue with one of our accounts I won't name, but they were essentially over ordering product. And then we had an issue of it not selling through completely. And so I had to like address that. And so I think you're right, like just making sure those lines of communication are open and transparent as best as possible to help brands succeed. Okay, anyone else have any other questions for Alex before we wrap up? Leave that out. All right, cool. So Alex, I think this is really great and helpful. Any closing thoughts that you want to leave the brands with?
I guess first, just, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for everyone's support. If I were to say anything, this industry is so much closer than people on the outside think. Like, hey, different people go to different brands, and retailers go to brands, and brands go to retailers. And I think, treating people with kindness and just understanding that almost every single person you're going to come across has the best intentions. They wake up every day and they want to do you good. Just keep that in mind as you operate in this business. And I think if you live by that principle and you work the network with positivity and just keep in mind we're all in this together, I think it'll give us all a leg up. So thanks for tuning in. I hope some of this was insightful to you. And if you do ever want to reach out, want to know more information about KeHE or who to contact in KeHE, you can always get a hold of me. My email address is alex.marx@kehe.com. So it's alex, alex.marx@kehe.com. And I'd be glad to help you out.
Perfect. Alex, thanks so much for being on today. It was so much fun. I'll also do a follow-up and share out Alex's information to everyone, along with a link to the recording of this video as well. So thanks so much for being on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.